Oh, sorry. Didn't see you there. I was just messing around with my new toy, you know. Anyways, today is a big day. You want to know why it's a big day? Because it's time for another tier list, baby. We had a lot of fun ranking inversions, but this time we're looking at something a little bit different. Restraints. Well, it's something we don't think about too often.
Okay, that's a lie. There are plenty of massive nerds out there that spend their time thinking about restraints all day.
Restraints can literally make or break a ride. Some rides are made famous by their restraints or lack thereof, and some are sullied with a reputation that sticks with them for eternity. So which ones are the best of the best, and which should be banished to the scrap heap? Let's find out. So to start things off, I'll be breaking restraints down into 3 major categories, as there are a few kind of subgroups where things are relatively similar between entries. I'm going to start things off with the most common form of restraint, the lap bar. Brilliantly simple, the lap bar consists of a single metal bar that comes down and rests on the lower half of your body, leaving your upper extremities free to dangle about and enjoy the ride. Now, it may surprise you to hear that there's precious little information out there about the history of roller coaster restraints, so I decided to start things off with a classic, the PTC lap bar. Now, the PTC lap bar can be found pretty much everywhere where you can find a wooden coaster, at your local Ace landmark and your oldish home park woody that hasn't yet been RMC'd. They come down from the side of the train, they ratchet down by your hip, and they're generally known by their very bright and obvious orange color scheme. So where do the first restraints land? And they fall into the low B tier. These are ubiquitous and they're thoroughly mid in my opinion. Their side drop design manages to effectively dig into my legs every time, force like a weird seating position where I have to like kind of pivot to the left or to the right depending on what side of the train I'm on. It's kind of uncomfortable and I don't understand why it has to be like that. That said, they don't lower during the ride and they do offer decent airtime room, so they couldn't be that bad. Which is a good thing because these things are literally everywhere in pretty much any coaster not made by GCI or the Gravity Group. So we could be doing a lot worse off. From one relatively safe pick to a subject of controversy, let's bring up the Arrow lap bar now. Now these guys are found on mine trains, non-inverting coasters, and the Big Daddy himself,
Magnum XL 200.
This little piece of steel proves that even something as simple as a lap bar can start a war among enthusiasts and the general public, where people will fight to the death discussing whether or not these are made from Satan or not. It is a relatively thin piece of steel that comes down the thighs and doesn't always have cushioning like you see in the Magnum train here, but it often does. So what do I think about this very controversial pick? I think it's pretty much exactly the same as the PTC lap bar, low B tier. It is an object of hate and derision among certain enthusiasts and a lot of the GP, but in my opinion, they're fine. There's a strategy to it. You tighten your seatbelt and you leave some room in the lap bar and you'll be fine, trust me. This works for me every time on Magnum. They can staple you, I'll give you that, but if you do nail the setup, they don't come down during the ride and they do give you decent room, which allows you to enjoy all of the elite, world-class airtime you find in a ride, like, you know,
Magnum XL 200.
I do understand, though, why people won't necessarily like this. I just implore you, if you think these restraints are really bad, just give my strategy a try. Put your seatbelt nice and tight, leave a little room in your lap bar, and trust me, you'll enjoy your ride a whole lot more than you currently do. Now, though, it's time to make a big jump into the modern era, let's introduce the B&M clamshell. These things are the standard bearer for the B&M Hyper ever since the debut of the original on Apollo's Chariot, literally over 20 years ago, which... man, I'm getting old. Their unique contoured shape and their bright colors really make them stand out in the minds of both enthusiasts and the GP alike, even though some of the GP tends to think that these restraints are literally extremely dangerous for whatever reason. That said, most people find these to be immensely comfortable, and I am one of those people. B&M Clamshell goes straight into the A tier. These things are comically comfortable, and they're easy to get an acre of airtime room out of, which is an underrated aspect of them. They're a little bit bulky, but that is being real nitpicky. They rest comfortably on your thighs, or 3 inches above your thighs, and they distribute the load of the airtime across a nice wide surface area. That does make it a bit awkward for ejector airtime, but really the vast majority of these rides, these things are amazing. The only reason they're not in the S tier is because there's one restraint that's just a little bit better than the clamshell. and that is the Intamin T-Bar. Now we're just gonna jump right into it here. The T-Bar is S tier.
Damn, boy! Damn, boy!
This is the gift from God. This is the greatest restraint ever made, and there is no contest. The Intamin T-Bar is as comfortable as a B&M clamshell, but minimalistic and freeing. It's easy to set, it doesn't come down during the ride, and it feels like there's literally nothing there as you're speeding at 90 miles an hour on the shore of Lake Erie. It's a shame these were neutered on so many rides, because I do legitimately believe that the Intamin T-Bar is the best restraint out there, even 20 years after its original debut. And that said, it has been a while since the debut of the Intamin T-Bar, and in that 20-year time span, a lot of newcomers have come in to shake things up. And we're going to talk about one of them right here with the RMC Lap Bar. And debuting in the 2010s, the RMC Lap Bar is the first restraint here to feature an additional element, being the shin guard. It's that little piece of rubber that sits down near your shins, prevents your legs from flying all over the place as you rocket through the world's largest step-up, underflip, stall, trick-track dive thingy. Now, I will say though, with the introduction of these shin guards right here, even though this restraint adorns many elite rides, I can't say I'm much of a fan. And I'd say the vast majority of the blame does lie with these shin guards, because I think they're thoroughly unnecessary. The lap bar provides more than enough restraint for these sorts of rides, even with all the strong ejector airtime. When I'm sitting on an RMC, it usually ends up being the shin guard that comes into contact with my body, and that's really bad, because instead of your nice padded thighs that have lots of muscle to protect you, these sit right on your shins, which have the exposed bone right there, and so they hurt a lot more. In addition, these are a pain in the ass to figure out loading procedures with, and you know if you ever tried to get a dual on Twisted Colossus. I'm not mad at all.
Demons trying to get Twisted Colossus to duel, and they can't do it. Ever.
But even after you're strapped in, these restraints can still manage to dig into both your thighs and your shins at the same time, and I don't really like them. That said, I am tall, so that may be the reason why. I'm sure shorter people would find this a little more comfortable, and it's not absolutely ride-breaking, so while I can't get above C tier, it's definitely good enough to stay above the D and the F tier. Oh yeah, and if you're curious where the Skyrush Thigh Crusher lands here, I'd probably put it in the C tier too. When it's bad, but 90% of the time I can position myself in a way to ensure that I can enjoy the insane airtime without any serious pain. And get stapled though, and oh boy, absolutely dreadful. And that brings us to the last of the lap bars, which brings us into our next category, the over-the-shoulder restraint. Sorry, I saw a picture of Viper and I got distracted. For decades, the over-the-shoulder restraint was de rigueur if you wanted a roller coaster with inversions. As time has marched forward, the over-the-shoulder restraint has become less and less ubiquitous, but these horse collars still litter thousands of older school rides across the world. And what better pick to start with than the Arrow over-the-shoulder restraint? The company that pioneered the modern inversion quite sensibly gets the first spot on this list. If you've ever been on an Arrow looper or a suspended coaster, you know the drill. A relatively thin bar that comes around your shoulders and rests down a little bit near your chest. So what do I think about the Arrow lap bar? I'm going to put this in the low B tier. Now, this is the prototypical standard over-the-shoulder restraint, and it's fine, it's okay. Not great, but it could be far worse. Now, I know people don't like this, but your problems with the Arrow over-the-shoulder restraint stem from the Arrow track work and not the restraint itself. If this Arrow OTSR was on like a B&M, for example, people would love this thing. They're relatively thin, which means you have a decent amount of space to move around, and they're not that restrictive too, giving you some room for airtime, which a lot of these old Arrow loopers have a lot of really random and fun airtime pops. If you're not so short that the top meets your ears, you'll generally clear, but I will admit that I do know people who are pretty short and their ears pretty much line up exactly with where the bar is, and that can cause a lot of headbanging. Thankfully, I'm tall enough to avoid that, but I understand if you do end up hating this restraint. And so on the subject of headbanging, by the way, one Dutch company tried to address this issue with a unique solution in the 1990s, debuting their own over-the-shoulder restraint on their Arrow Track knockoff SLCs and boomerangs. By patting the hell out of the restraint, Vekoma attempted to eliminate headbanging by coddling the head nice and tight, leaving little room for the head to fly around through questionable transitions and forceful maneuvers. Did it work though? Hell no, it didn't. This thing sucks!
Boomerang at knots.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
We have our first F tier, guys. Now, I will say the SLC Restraint is a noble idea with just absolutely shit execution. And these things were designed to cushion the blow, but instead of cushioning blows, they make the blows totally unavoidable in the smallest of transitions. Unlike on arrows, where you can usually get away with a decent amount of head movement before you actually get a headbang. These things are so close to your ears that no matter what height you're at, it is literally impossible to avoid your head being ground down into a fine mist. And there's a reason that SLCs and boomerangs have the terrible reputation they do today, and I can chalk them up pretty much entirely to these restraints right here. I won't miss them when they're all gone. Now we're up to our B&M choice, and unlike the lap bar, B&M started things off relatively safe with their own over-the-shoulder restraint back in their initial run of coasters. I'd say it's more on the side of Arrow than Vekoma. There's a lot more space to move your head around, but there is more padding near the head that comes up a little decent a bit higher compared to the Arrow restraints, for example. But these are pretty solid, though. I'm gonna put them in the B tier. They're absolutely fine. They're comfy enough, they give decent room, and they are up against the ears a little bit, but even if you do headbang through the very few headbanging transitions and like the oldest of old school B&Ms, they're still pretty comfortable. The most important aspect of this, though, is that they leave enough room for airtime, which can be somewhat rare on the loopers and inverts you usually find these on, but if you do get a nice airtime pop, you literally fly around the seat, and it's a lot of fun. I can't complain about these. I definitely say I'd prefer them over the B&M vests, but, you know, they're alright. I'll take them. From something totally standard to something extremely weird, here's an interesting one. Let's look at Intamin's take on the over-the-shoulder restraint. This is found in some of their famous accelerator coasters and some of their most wildly intense rides. This takes a different approach from the previous manufacturers. Instead of the bulky bars that are kind of well cushioned, Intamin went with thin but hard bars that met at a little pool noodle thingy that sits like just above your waist. And I said these guys have a lot less give than some of the previous restraints on this list. And it's no surprise that it's a little bit worse than previous entries as a result. Honestly, this is a pretty stupid idea. I don't really know why they went with it. Intamin did have the wisdom to kind of put these hard plastic supports pretty far from the rider's head, but if your head ever does make contact with them, or your neck does, you're in a world of pain. That said, they're still a bit overhated because the rides that they're on at this point, honestly, are a non-factor. Let's take King Ka, for example. You're shooting straight up and then heading back straight down. These bars are basically a non-factor and they don't affect the ride in any way whatsoever. Finally, I should bring up the most modern over-the-shoulder restraint, and that's the Gerstlauer over-the-shoulder. Unlike other manufacturers like Vekoma or B&M, Gerstlauer is still kicking it old school with their horse collar. And you can find this on a random smattering of Eurofighters across the globe that for some reason did not debut with lap bars. Unfortunately though, these aren't great. I don't know why. These seem to take inspiration from the Vekoma school of headbanging with a nice bulky over-the-shoulder that seems to be just a little too close to your body for comfort, but at least there's some distance between you and your ears, unlike what you would see in an SLC. These things are just like really bulky too, and there's not a good reason for it. It's the 21st century, for God's sakes. We're like 23 years into this. Come on, you couldn't think of a better one than this? Come on, pick it up, Gerstlauer. Let's go. Come on, you could do better than this. I believe in you. And now finally we come to our last grouping, and these are the alternative restraints. And these guys don't really fit into either of the traditional categories. No, they're different, and you're just going to have to accept it, Mom. And here you can find some modern solutions to the classic over-the-shoulder problem of headbanging, be it with those so-called comfort collars or vest restraints. So how do they stack up to their old-school counterparts? Well, we'll start off with Intamin, who made the wise decision to retrofit some of their early over-the-shoulder rides with a little bit more padded and a little bit more flexible collars that still cut a little bit close to your neck. You can find these on Maverick, Intimidator 305, and thank God these are on Hut 305 now instead of the original restraints, and plenty more of 2000 era Intamins. I'm fine with these. These are gonna land in the B tier. I don't hate them, but I don't love them either. I understand they're kind of a necessary evil in some of Intamin's more diabolical creations. Trust me, I've been on I-305 enough times to see a lot of people lose consciousness through the majority of the ride. I understand why Intamin wouldn't want people's heads flapping around like a plastic bag, drifting through the wind, waiting to start again. That said, they can rob you of airtime if you don't set them up exactly right, which is a little bit annoying. And they can clothesline you as well, especially in your neck, which is kind of uncomfortable, but it is a kind of rare occurrence. That said, knowing what we came from, this is definitely an upgrade over the hard over the shoulder. They're generally comfortable, and overall I can't complain too much. The same can't be said about our next choice, which is Premier Ride's take on the comfort collar, and this is just a weird one. Unlike the Intimate Restraints, the Premier collars are really floppy. They don't cling to the chest tightly at all. It's a kind of weird design if you ask me. And these go into the C tier. These are just lame. Especially if you've been in a Skyrocket 2 with just a lap bar, which I have, and it's so much better. I don't understand why West Coast racers or all these Skyrocket 2s need these. Nice. You can take your hands and kind of spread them apart, which I found is the best way to ride. If literally you just hold your hands like this the whole time, your neck and your head won't make contact with them at all the entire ride. But you'll look like an idiot who's trying to rip off his shirt like a rip-off Superman at a bad Halloween party. If you don't do that though, they're just gonna flap around and continuously slap into your neck and chest like a pool noodle that your brother is slapping you in the face with at your 3rd grade birthday party. I think these are totally unnecessary, and I really don't understand them. Intamin definitely did a better job with the comfort collars than Premier did. Oh well. Now moving on to a different solution, we finally arrived at the vest restraint. It's probably the most modern solution out there, and these things take one step further from the comfort collar, and they cover up most of your body in a retractable rubber vest. B&M has shifted to these almost entirely on their loopers and inverts, and at this point it seems like they've left the old over-the-shoulder restraint completely in the dust. You can find these on Banshee, all the new dives, all the new wing coasters, etc, etc. Now I know these aren't the most beloved in the enthusiast community, but I still think they're B tier. I don't think they're that bad. Yes, they do hurt airtime a little bit, but it's not the end of the world to me. They don't feel too claustrophobic, and there are a lot worse restraints on this list. That said, I'd still probably take the over-the-shoulder over it, but it is nice to have a restraint that completely eliminates the possibility of headbanging. Not like you're getting any headbanging on a modern B&M, but that's besides the point. You know, I'd rather that the old B&M trains keep their over-the-shoulders, but I really don't mind the new vests. They're fine. They're fine. They're totally okay. Which brings us to our last alternative restraint, and that's the Vekoma vest. And these have become the savior of old SLCs and boomerangs, Vekoma coming in and giving these old hang and bangs a new lease on life with their retrofit. And it seems like every year these become more and more common as the brand new trains take over the rails from the old, bulky monstrosities that gave old school Vekoma such a horrendous reputation. What do I think about these? These are great. These go right up into the A tier. We're going straight to A for this one. Vekoma got this right. These are comfortable and they don't feel too constricting like the B&M vests sometimes can. They just feel a little bit roomier than the B&M counterparts, and they have a little more slack, which is definitely appreciated. Honestly, they should put these in every single old Arrow looper so they can stay around for the next 50 years and people will begin to actually like them. As long as we can keep the old anti-rollbacks, because I don't know if I'd be able to live in a world without that glorious clacky sound. Finally, we're finishing things off with a restraint that isn't really a restraint at all, and that is the buzz bar. It's hard to really explain what this restraint is because it really doesn't do anything at all. It just comes down at a single position from the top of the car and it rests a comfortable few inches off your body, regardless of how tall or small you are. These are an endangered species, but you can find these on the oldest of old school rides like the Coney Island Cyclone, Thunderbolt at Kennywood, and yes, Phoenix at Knoebels. And if you thought I didn't have enough hot takes in this video, get ready because this one is coming in strong. The buzz bar is a B tier restraint.
Sometimes my genius, it generates gravity.
I think these are generally overrated. Why, you may ask? Because it's too freeing. Thomas, how could you say your restraint is too freeing? Don't you love getting like 6 inches of airtime room in your B&M restraint? Yeah, I do. But there's a limitation there. Like, even the best lap bars, like the B&M clamshell or the Morgan lap bar that leave you a ton of room, still have a little bit of restriction, be it a seatbelt or a tiny amount of room that kind of keeps you in your seat and keeps you from banging around the car like a ping pong ball. In the case of strong airtime in a buzz bar, though, you can't say the same thing. Now, I like Phoenix a lot, it's a great ride, but I do think it'd be legitimately a little bit better with some modern lap bars. Because on that last lap where you're just bouncing up and down, you're literally just banging around and you have no control where your body's going. Your knees, your thighs, your feet, even your shins are just slamming everywhere, and it's just kind of painful. I don't really like it. I will say the Buzz Bar is great for rides with a lot of laterals, like the Coney Island Cyclone or Thunderbolt. Not the Thunderbolt lets you ride alone, so you can't really experience it. But on the Cyclone, it's a great time because the laterals literally pin you to one side of the train and then you fly across. It's a lot more comfortable on the Cyclone because the Cyclone's train is literally a couch cushion. It's so great, and if I were just basing this off the Cyclone, I'd probably put it in the S tier, but from the other Buzz Bar rides I've experienced, they're good. They're good. I don't think they're the second coming of Christ. I understand why a lot of rides don't use them anymore, because, you know, they probably are a bit of a safety hazard. TBH. That said, they are fun and unique, and I'm definitely glad that a couple of old rides are still sticking around with these absurdly minimalistic restraints. Hey, this is me from the future. While I was editing this video, I realized that I was kind of unnecessarily harsh to the Buzz Bar. I actually really like the Buzz Bar, and so I'm just gonna pretend that I didn't put it in the B tier. And we're just gonna move it up here into A. Yeah, just like that. Perfect. Anyway, so that's the final tally. We've run the full gamut on this one, from the god tier Intamin T-Bar to the legendarily horrid Vekoma horse collar. As you can see here, though, most of these restraints fall basically in the middle of the road. And that's because most of the time, a decent restraint is just something you don't really notice. They may cause the most mild of inconveniences, but at the end of the day, they do their job, which is keeping us safe, while we get to enjoy humanity's greatest thrill machines. Thank you for watching.